A journalist once asked India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri whether India had finally arrived on the world stage. His answer was simple. He said that when he last checked, India had already been on the world stage for 7,000 years. That one line says a lot. For thousands of years, this land has been a major center of trade, knowledge, science, spirituality, craftsmanship, and wealth. Long before many modern nations existed, India was already building cities, developing ideas, trading across oceans, and creating things that would eventually become part of everyday life around the world. The point is that Bharat's story is ancient, deep, and continuous. So when people talk about India rising today, they often miss something important. India is certainly rising economically and politically, but in another sense, it is also returning to a level of global attention that this civilization has experienced many times before. Today's video is about a pattern, something that has been ordinary in India for decades, sometimes centuries, reaches the West, gets a new name, new packaging, and a new marketing story, and suddenly becomes the next big thing. That is what this video is really about. So here are Indian habits, traditions, and age-old secrets that America and the West are only now discovering. And once they do, they cannot seem to stop buying, trying, and turning them into the next big trend. At number 1, we have the golden drink. Golden milk is not some new wellness invention. In India, it is simply haldi doodh or turmeric milk, a traditional household drink that has been used for generations, especially for sore throats, colds, and general comfort. Modern research literature still describes haldi doodh as a traditional Indian drink and home remedy. The basic idea has always been simple: warm milk, turmeric, and sometimes honey or black pepper. Now look at what has happened in the West. Starbucks now sells a version of this drink as its golden turmeric latte, made with espresso, oat milk, turmeric, ginger, cinnamon, black pepper, vanilla, and honey. In 2026, American cafes have been adding iced turmeric drinks to their menus as part of the growing demand for less sweet, wellness-style beverages. So something that Indian families have known as haldi doodh for generations is now being sold back to the world as a modern cafe trend. Turmeric has been part of Indian food, medicine, ceremonies, and everyday life for centuries. But there is an even more interesting detail: the black pepper. Today, wellness brands often talk about adding black pepper because piperine, the main active compound in black pepper, can increase the absorption of curcumin, one of turmeric's best-known compounds. It is food science practiced in Indian kitchens for centuries, long before anyone called it bioavailability. Ayurveda paired turmeric with black pepper for a specific functional reason. India supplies the overwhelming majority of the world's turmeric, grown across states like Telangana, Maharashtra, and Tamil Nadu, using cultivation knowledge refined over thousands of years of continuous harvest. Global curcumin and turmeric extract sales have grown steadily as American consumers search for natural anti-inflammatory alternatives to over-the-counter medication. And turmeric now appears not only in lattes, but in gummies, capsules, skincare, and even pet supplements. At number 2, we have the snack that is quietly replacing popcorn. Makhana or foxnuts, harvested from the seeds of an aquatic plant grown almost entirely in the wetlands of Bihar, has been a staple Indian snack and fasting food for generations. Eaten plain, roasted, or spiced. It was never positioned as premium. It was simply what was available, nutritious and light. The global foxnuts market is worth nearly $140 million in 2026, and it is expected to keep growing by more than 8% every year over the next decade. India produces around 90% of the world's foxnuts, with most of them coming from the wetlands of Bihar. In the United States, foxnuts are becoming especially popular as a snack. More than half of the demand now comes from the snack food market, while the rest comes from wellness and dietary products. And most American consumers are discovering them online or through specialty health food stores. The reason is nutrition. Makhana is naturally gluten-free, low in calories, and high in protein, fiber, magnesium, and potassium. Everything the modern American snacking consumer is actively searching for on a label. India was already growing the answer. The farmers behind this shift are almost entirely concentrated in a handful of districts across Bihar, where the aquatic Euryaliferax plant has been cultivated in ponds and wetlands for generations, using techniques passed down within families. As American demand climbs, Indian exporters are scaling packaging, flavoring, and distribution in Western markets. At number 3, we have Indian grains going global. Ragi and bajra, or finger millet and pearl millet, have fed rural India for over 5,000 years. Grown in conditions too harsh and too dry for rice or wheat, they were never a health food category. They were survival food and then became a comfort food, and they stayed that way for millennia without ever needing a rebrand. American food writers are now explicitly describing ragi as the Indian grain replacing quinoa in U.S. supermarkets, citing its suitability for health-conscious, sustainability-minded consumers looking for a gluten-free, climate-resilient grain. Ragi's calcium content runs nearly 20 times higher than quinoa's. Bajra's iron content is more than 5 times higher. Both are precisely the minerals most commonly missing from modern diets on either side of the world. The United Nations declared 2023 the International Year of Millets specifically to draw global attention to grains like these, climate-resilient, nutrient-dense, and already perfected by India. The University of Nebraska has published its own extension guide on cooking with millet, describing it as a crop expected to grow out of its niche status in the United States in the years ahead. Millets grow with a fraction of the water that rice or wheat require, tolerate poor soil, and survive the erratic rainfall that climate change is making more common across the world. American food policy conversations increasingly frame climate-resilient crops as a strategic necessity rather than a lifestyle preference. And millets are one of the very few grains that arrive already field-tested at scale, because Indian farmers have been growing them under exactly these harsh conditions for thousands of continuous growing seasons. At number 4, we have the Indian coffee America is finally discovering. The South Indian filter coffee is a specific brewing method, not just a flavor. Finely ground, dark roasted coffee filtered slowly through a metal percolator, then mixed with hot milk and poured between 2 vessels to create a light foam. It has been the daily ritual of South Indian households for well over a century, entirely independent of the global coffee shop culture that now surrounds it. Industry coverage in 2026 has specifically flagged Indian coffee as a rising category in the American market, citing a combination of favorable trade conditions, record export quality, and a coffee-drinking public actively looking for something beyond the familiar. Indian filter coffee, brewed and served exactly as it has been for generations, is quickly finding fans in the U.S. It offers a rich and bold flavor profile. India's own domestic coffee market, valued at close to $10 billion and growing at nearly 7% annually, is dominated by South India, which accounts for roughly half of all domestic consumption, specifically because of this deep-rooted filter coffee culture. America is only now catching up to this brewing method. At number 5, we have the Indian cookware trend going global. Brass, clay, cast iron, and copper cookware are the everyday tools that Indian kitchens have used for centuries. India's own cookware market, valued at over $3 billion and growing steadily, shows cast iron and other traditional formats now outpacing the broader market's growth rate. Driven explicitly by consumer interest in chemical-free cooking and the flavor these materials produce that no non-stick coating can replicate. In the United States, well-known premium cookware brands have launched their own version of the Indian kadai, developed specifically to introduce Western kitchens to a piece of cookware Indian households have never been without. Rising American concern over PFAS chemicals, the so-called forever chemicals found in non-stick coatings, has sent health-conscious cooks searching for alternatives. India never had to search. Indian kitchens simply never left cast iron, clay, and brass behind in the first place. So while modern kitchens are now looking backward for safer and simpler cookware, India already had many of those answers sitting on the kitchen shelf. At number 6, we have the self-care rituals going viral on TikTok. Champi, the Indian head and scalp massage using warm oil, is what Indians have been doing longer than anyone can trace, using coconut, mustard, sesame, or almond oil. Hair oiling content has become one of the most consistently viral wellness categories on TikTok, with videos demonstrating the technique accumulating enormous view counts and comment sections full of Americans discovering, often for the first time, a routine that Indian households have been doing regularly for generations. Alongside it, oil pulling, swishing oil in the mouth to reduce bacteria, and copper tongue scraping have followed the same path from ancient daily routine into mainstream American oral care. The scientific backing has followed the trend. The U.S. National Institutes of Health has recognized oil pulling's documented effect in reducing plaque-induced gum disease and bacterial colony counts in the mouth, a technique known in Sanskrit texts as kavala, practiced in Indian households for thousands of years before any laboratory confirmed what those households already knew. Tongue scraping is another example. What many Americans now see as a new wellness habit has long been part of everyday oral hygiene in Indian households, usually done first thing in the morning to remove buildup from the tongue. Again and again, practices that were once dismissed as old-fashioned or unfamiliar are being rediscovered, repackaged, and introduced to the West as new wellness trends. At number 7, we have the Indian superfood America is quietly putting into everything. Moringa, better known in India as the drumstick tree, has been part of Indian food for generations. Its pods and leaves are cooked into vegetable dishes. Moringa powder is now showing up in supplements, teas, energy drinks, health bars, and other wellness products. American consumers are adopting it as a nutrient-rich green ingredient, while scientific reviews note that moringa leaves contain a wide range of vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and plant compounds. India is already the world's main supplier of moringa. According to APITA, India meets around 80% of global demand, helped by the fact that moringa has been grown and eaten in the country for a very long time. Moringa is not the only Indian tradition finding a new audience abroad. Kashmir has another one, and it is kahwa. This traditional green tea is brewed with warming spices like cardamom and cinnamon, often finished with saffron and crushed almonds. For generations, it has been a familiar part of life in Kashmiri homes, especially during the cold winter months. Now the same drink is being used in America in different forms, packed into modern tea bags, served as cafe-style lattes, and marketed as a premium wellness drink. What feels new to many consumers abroad has been part of Kashmiri culture for generations. At number 8 is a root that broke into America's medicine cabinet. Ashwagandha is an evergreen shrub native to India, the Middle East, and parts of Africa, highly revered as a premier adaptogen that helps the body manage physical and mental stress. It is one of the most foundational herbs in Ayurvedic medicine, used for over 3,000 years. The global ashwagandha market is now valued at close to $1 billion and is projected to roughly double by the early 2030s, with North America identified as the single fastest growing region in the world for the ingredient, expanding faster than the Asia-Pacific market, where the herb actually originates. Gummies are the single fastest growing product format, specifically because younger American consumers want their stress relief to feel less like medicine and more like a wellness snack. Major American supplement brands alongside Indian companies like Himalaya Wellness and Dabur are now racing to launch ashwagandha-infused products across capsules, powders, protein blends, and beverages. What changed is not the herb. What changed is that American consumers, overwhelmed by pharmaceutical stress management, finally went looking for something gentler and found that India had already spent 3,000 years perfecting the answer. India has responded to the surge in global demand with deliberate policy support, including government-backed cultivation projects aimed at expanding ashwagandha farming and establishing the country as a permanent hub for medicinal plant exports. This is not a country scrambling to meet an unexpected trend. It is a country that has always understood the value of what it grows, watching the rest of the world finally place a price tag that matches the plant's actual worth. At number 9 is the healthy fat America cannot get enough of. Ghee, originating from the Indian subcontinent, is as fundamental to Indian cooking as olive oil is to Italian cooking. It does not burn easily, making it great for high-heat cooking. It lacks water and milk solids, so it can last for months at room temperature without spoiling. The global ghee market is valued at over $50 billion in 2026 and is projected to keep expanding at a steady pace through the next decade, with North America identified as the fastest growing region. After years of being told to avoid fat, many American consumers are now becoming more comfortable with natural healthy fats again. That has helped ghee gain popularity, especially because it can handle high cooking temperatures and is often seen as easier to digest than regular butter. The interesting part is that these are the same reasons Indian families have valued ghee for generations. What is now being rediscovered as a modern health food in America has been a normal part of Indian kitchens for centuries. Paneer, the fresh, unaged cheese that anchors so much of Indian vegetarian cooking, is following a quieter but similarly steady path onto American grocery shelves, propelled by the same high-protein, low-processed food wave that has made cottage cheese fashionable again. The irony is specific and worth naming directly. American nutrition guidance spent the better part of 4 decades instructing people to avoid saturated animal fats and replace them with processed seed oils. Indian households, largely unmoved by that guidance, kept cooking with ghee throughout the entire period. As the American scientific consensus has shifted, quietly reversing much of that earlier advice, the fat that never left Indian kitchens is now the fat that American wellness culture is rediscovering as though it were a breakthrough. At number 10, we have the sweetener quietly replacing sugar. Jaggery, gur as it is called across most of India, is unrefined sugar, made by boiling down sugarcane juice or palm sap until it solidifies, retaining the iron, calcium, magnesium, and potassium that refined white sugar strips away entirely. It has never been marketed in India as healthy. It has simply always been what sweetened tea, desserts, and festival food in millions of households, long before refined sugar became widely available at all. American demand for jaggery is now rising specifically among health-conscious consumers in the United States and Canada, looking for a natural, mineral-rich alternative to refined sugar, as awareness grows of the broader health costs of high sugar consumption. Multiple USDA-certified organic jaggery brands now sit among Amazon's best-selling sugar and sweetener products, purchased by an American consumer base that, in most cases, has never before encountered sugar in anything other than its fully refined form. The broader American sugar alternatives market is worth billions of dollars and growing steadily, driven by consumers who no longer trust ingredient labels the way they once did. Jaggery arrives with an advantage no synthetic sweetener can claim. It has been trusted, unchanged, for longer than written nutrition science has existed. At number 11, we have the beauty industry's next big thing. Neem, saffron, turmeric, and sandalwood have been the foundation of Indian skincare for so long that no Indian household ever needed a marketing category to describe using them. A turmeric face mask before a wedding, a neem-based wash for troubled skin, a saffron oil for brightening. These were passed down through mothers and grandmothers as plain, practical knowledge, never packaged, never named. International beauty coverage has explicitly begun describing Ayurvedic skincare as the successor to the K-beauty wave that dominated the last decade. Traditional Indian ingredients married to modern formulations and sold under what industry writers are now calling A-beauty. At least one brand founded by a beauty entrepreneur with South Asian roots, built specifically around saffron and other Ayurvedic actives, is now sold inside Sephora stores across the United States. The global market for Ayurvedic and organic personal care products is measured in the tens of billions of dollars, with India's own Ayurveda personal care segment alone valued at over $13 billion in 2026. A market increasingly fed not only by Indian consumers replacing synthetic products, but by Western shoppers actively seeking out the ingredient transparency and heritage that Ayurveda has always offered for free. Neem alone, long used across India for acne, dandruff, and general skin health because of its natural antibacterial properties, is now a headline ingredient across American clean beauty formulations, positioned as a breakthrough discovery for a plant that Indian households have understood for thousands of years. Every single item in this list existed inside Indian homes for decades, in most cases centuries, before an American brand repackaged it, renamed it, and sold it back to a market that had never encountered it in its original form. What has changed is not India. What has changed is that the rest of the world finally realized and discovered that the healthiest, cleanest, most tested version of almost everything it was searching for had already existed, unbroken in Indian households the entire time. India is not catching up to a wellness trend. India is the source the wellness industry has been quietly mining for years, dressed up in new branding and sold back to the very culture that once dismissed it as too traditional to matter. It is the recognition that a civilization which never stopped trusting its own accumulated knowledge, through colonization, through famine, through decades of being told its methods were backward and its science unproven, is now watching that same knowledge being used, one product launch at a time, by the wealthiest consumer market on earth. Nobody in India needed America's approval to know that these worked. If this gave you something to think about, share it with someone who still thinks these are new discoveries. Like, subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.